Stuart Bray here with part one of the three-part sculpting tutorial, Sculpting Prosthetics. This is part one about blocking out basically and getting the cast ready. So here's my plaster cast I've got kicking around in the workshop. It's been here for a while, it's kind of dusty. So what I need to do is prepare the surface so that it can be sculpted on, because at the moment plastiline isn't going to stick particularly well to a dusty surface. So I'm using a very thin coat of vaseline on the surface, just a very thin coat. Rub it all over where you're going to sculpt. If you're not quite sure where your piece is going to finish, you may as well just kind of do the whole surface. Just rub it in with your hands. If this is a bit sticky and horrible, you can use either a brush or use a pair of gloves or something on your hands if you want, because obviously once you've got that all over your hands it's kind of nasty. But buff it all over, and then what I tend to do then is take most of it off with a tissue, because it's still a little bit greasy. If you have too much on there, what's going to happen is the stuff's just going to slide around all over the place. So it's just the thinnest possible coat. The next thing I'm going to do is use a pencil. I'm just going to mark out exactly where my sculpt is going to finish on the life cast. So here I just want to make sure that I finish below the eyebrow, but I also don't want to go too low onto the eyelid, because otherwise that's going to compromise how well the lid can move. If this piece was stuck onto their lid, it's going to actually stop their eyelid from opening fully, which may be an effect you're after, but if you're not, it's going to look like he can't open his eyes properly. So it's not my job to try and interfere with the face too much. So what I do is pencil around the eyes where I want the piece to finish, and also the wrinkles. That's very important if you want to try and preserve the wrinkles, which I do here. You just pencil in where the wrinkles and folds on the skin are, and it just makes them much easier to see, so when you're sculpting you don't lose sight of them so easily. I'm also marking in a hairline. This guy was actually bald, but normally you will have a hairline, so I'm just sketching in where the hairline would be. The clay I'm going to use, or the plastiline I'm going to use, is Le Beau Touché by Chavant. I used to hate this stuff, but I kind of really like it now. It's very sticky, but I find I can sculpt quite quickly with it. This whole tutorial was sculpted in less than 2.5–3 hours, so you know, it's pretty swift stuff. I quite like working with it. And what I want to do is start putting little blobs on, very small blobs, and then sort of squeezing them down with the thumb so that they become sort of flattened on the surface, and that helps them stick to the surface of the plaster. So just make sure you press them really firmly, and like I say, you only want to be about 2 or 3 millimeters thick. So press them firmly down, and you can kind of nudge them up to the edge of your pencil line, so that you keep them within the sort of designated sculpting area, and you try and preserve that sort of area where you don't want the plastiline to go. Okay, so moving on from there, I start pushing more and more out towards the forehead, and again I will stop when I get close to my pencil line at the top. Okay, if you get sort of larger pieces of plastiline, almost like sort of sausages, you can kind of push those down and nudge them out again, and you can cover a larger area quicker that way, once you've got enough of that on there. I mean, sometimes if the plastiline is warm as well, it's easier to kind of move around, so maybe use a hairdryer. Here I'm starting to increase the wrinkles, so I'm working a sausage either side of the pencil line. So I put a sausage down and stop at the pencil line, go the other side, and again nudge it up to that pencil line. And if you keep doing that, you basically preserve the position of the wrinkles, so you don't lose them under the plastiline. Otherwise, if you didn't do that, you'd have a sea, this blanket of red clay over the whole thing. You wouldn't know where your wrinkles are anymore. So by doing it this way, you actually preserve their original position, so that when the material ultimately of the piece is made, the skin will fold and compress in the same places as the original person's skin does. So here I'm just building up the other part of the cheek and making sure that the back end is kind of blended out. You just kind of smudge it down with the thumb as you go. You can also use a wooden tool as well. It's just quite nice at this stage to kind of smooth the little bits out with the end of the wooden tool, just because you've got a lot more control with a small tool like that than your fingers, which can kind of be a bit too big and clumsy, well mine are anyway, for that kind of fine area. So I find the tool's quite good. And also for sort of cutting back like there, if it's getting a bit too far, you can kind of cut it back so you keep within your pencil lines. Tool coming in handy again there, just to blend those little edges out. That's kind of roughed in there. I'm also going to just sort of underline this kind of eye bag area with the sculpting tool as well, just kind of help refine that up a little bit. And then using my thumb, I'm always using the thumb just to kind of smooth and nudge things across. If you smudge the little lumps together, you end up with a nice kind of smooth area. And this works particularly when on large areas, rather than using vaseline or a lighter fluid or something. If you just use your thumb, you can smooth out large areas quite quickly, especially with this stuff. And it gives you a nice kind of smooth area that you can start carving your detail into. What I need to do now is to start building up my brow area, my vampire brow. So building up a bit more volume here using big sausages of plastiline. And again, I don't want to build too much up, because this guy, when he's wearing this, he can frown when he's wearing it. So I don't want to make him look like he's really, really angry all the time. So I kind of go for a halfway house where he's kind of frowning, but not too much. I find a lot of these brows can look excessive and extreme. So let's allow for the performer to actually add to it with his own brow movement. One thing I also do is, because I'm right-handed, I tend to kind of work one side better than the other. So it's good to try and keep it balanced. If you can, try and do one side and then sort of let the other side catch up, so you're not too far ahead on one side. And here I'm just using a wooden tool to kind of carve in very roughly where I want my folds and wrinkles to be in the middle of the forehead. Again, these wooden tools are great for that, because you can just kind of carve in, but they'll also use the edge of the tool, the tip, to kind of smooth and knock off the edges so it's not too harsh. Like here, just kind of carve in a line and then sort of use the edge of my thumb to kind of carve them out and smooth them so that they're a little bit more refined. Like here, you just carve a line in and then just knock the edges off with the tip of the tool, and it just rounds it off a little bit, and then you can kind of go in with the thumb. I'm going to sort of establish now my main wrinkle and folds in the forehead, trying to not make them too symmetrical, which is really easily done. So just kind of put them in very roughly. I'm also going to carve a little bit into this sort of side here to try and match up. Again, it's slightly different to the other side, so trying to keep that symmetrical. So I need to carve a little groove into that side. It gives it a bit more interest as well. It's looking a bit too sort of smooth and plain. Now I'm going to start carving into my wrinkles a little bit. So if you use a loop tool, you can kind of carve into it just to establish it a bit more, and then just kind of shave the edges down. Here's a nice close-up of how that works. You just kind of, once you've carved in your groove, you can just use the other end of the loop tool to just kind of shave the edge off that corner, and you end up with a nice kind of rounded off sort of line in the surface of the plastiline, which is a lot more natural than just a hard line. Okay, here's the griffin hook I really like, and just start to shave these edges down. You can see how these edges aren't quite blended in enough yet, so I can take some of the material away, just rake the surface like that, shaving a little bit off at a time, and then smudge that across to the thumb. The other thing you can use is this brass tool which I've made, which is just twisted brass into a little metal handle, and then you can again drag that across, and that just shaves that edge down. And then there's so little material on there now, you can just use your thumb to help smooth it out, and that will give you a very nice edge. It's also important to do that around the eyes as well. Obviously the eyes are a very focal part of the face, particularly with our sort of mean looking brow, so take a bit of time to go around the eyes and make sure that the piece is kind of gradually going from the thickness of the brow down to the real skin underneath in a kind of a pleasing fashion. You don't want it to be too rapid a drop, otherwise it's going to look more like a mask than as if it's part of their face. And it's good as well. Here I'm just kind of hacking back a little bit to make sure I go back to my pencil line, because I don't want my piece to encroach on the eyelid too much. So there we go. We're sort of getting close to a blocked out now. We're getting very close to being the refining stage, which is going to be the part 2 video, where I'm going to look at how we actually reduce and refine the surface and make it a lot more sort of pleasing and natural. And then once we've done that, then we can move on to the texturing of the surface to give it a bit more of a natural kind of finish. Okay, well, thanks for watching. Check out the part 2 video as soon as that's up, and check out my website, learnprostheticmakeup.com.